So, journalism. It's been much in the news, journalism. Marissa, you've been testifying before Congress about how it's not Google's fault. The Wall Street Journal has been, a year and a half ago or so, purchased by News Corp, and you now have a new boss, Mr. Murdoch, who is convinced that paying for content is the answer. The Huffington Post has gotten an awful lot of both heat and traffic and notice for growing very, very quickly. And the New York Times just can't seem to stay out of the news. It's always sort of at the front of what happens if we don't have New York Times-like quality, long-term, investigative journalism that occurs both at the Journal and at the Times. But the debate seems focused on this idea of the death of the newspaper. Is that the right focus? Maybe I'll start with you.
No, I think that's the wrong focus for a lot of reasons. The first reason is that the newspaper itself is actually pretty healthy, at least the Times is, and the idea that newspapers are going to disappear tomorrow, I think, is a cliche and has been a cliche for a while. Just speaking for the Times, over the last couple of years, we've been very, very stable at about 820,000 home delivery subs who have been with us for 2 years or more. And typically, the churn rates on those people, basically you have to die or move to the moon to fall out of that group. It's a very,
aren't a lot of people doing that?
Loyal group.
Not the moon one.
Moving to the moon, no.
But I mean, aren't the people...
But new people come into that franchise, of course. And that's why I say it's been a stable number over the last several years. I just think the idea, I think we have so many more interesting and more important things to talk about than that I think we should just move on and talk about those interesting things. Just my opinion.
So you think the newspaper, well, I am interested in that idea that the news, because we read about newspapers closing a lot. Maybe not the Times, maybe not the Journal, but I think the local newspaper in particular has been pretty hard hit.
Actually, the large metropolitan newspaper has been more under pressure than the local newspapers. Actually, local newspapers are still pretty healthy, but the large metropolitan newspapers have been the most troubled, particularly through the recession. And you're absolutely right, some of them have closed.
Right. Let's move on then from the newspaper. I'm happy to do that. Robert, the model that I think the Journal has held out for many, many years is, we've gotten a lot of people to pay. Recently, we've had some pretty significant saber rattling from folks like Curley at the AP and Murdoch about, it's time for other folks besides individuals to pay, like Google. I think they didn't say specifically Google, they said search engines or those who aggregate our content and make money on it without giving us money back. Is that is there a model there? Are you personally, do you feel like Google owes you a buck?
Well, I don't know whether Google owes me a buck, but I think there's a debate still to be had about click-through and pay-per-click, which is a model that Google has used successfully on the commercial side, in part, frankly, at the expense of content creators. There are two types of people in the world. There are originators and there are aggregators. And at the moment, the cost burden falls on the originators. But I think people are prepared to pay for content. At the moment, there are three types of people in the world. There are the net Neanderthals who think everything should be free all the time. There are people who pay for ISP, $19.99 a month or whatever. And actually, a lot of them think they're getting access to a content buffet. And there's a third group of people who are already on top of that paying for content. So the will is there. What we all have to work through is the way.
Can you give us any insight on that?
Well, having a debate about it obviously is important, which is clearly what we've been doing, provoking and stimulating and maybe unintentionally insulting. But
Marissa, are you insulted?
No.
But it is important to debate it because it's not. There's a piece about the twilight of the newspaper in the just out Harper's, and to be honest, it seems to be more about the emotional state of the writer than the state of the industry. And we need to have a rational debate. It's almost platform neutral about professional journalism, because in the end, it's not so much the means of delivery, but the means of creation. And it's that very issue that is the sort of thing we should all be talking about. And it doesn't mean that professional journalism is the antithesis of citizen journalism. And all, there's almost a false dichotomy there. I think in large part they're complementary, but we do need a social narrator who is professional, and that is, and has been, and should be a journalist.
So Marissa, how do you respond to this debate? I mean, you testified before Congress in May, and you pointed out the value that a large distributor of attention like Google provides. And Google's been involved in a lot of things, this fast flip recently and the dearly departed print project that you guys worked on for a couple of years that didn't seem to work out. So how do you respond to those statements which sort of got everybody a bit excited in the last month or two?
Well, I think it's important to acknowledge that journalism as a media is going through a transition right now. How does it function online? How do people want to consume it? Where is the digital doorstep? How do you hold engagement online? And that's going to require a lot of experimentation, a lot of pragmatism. And that's what you see us doing with things like Fast Flip. But that said, even in our core business, there's a lot of things that we do to help publishers. Google actually pays out more than $5 billion a year to publishers. And to news publishers in particular, we deliver more than 1 billion clicks a month from Google News. And when you add Google search to that, it's billions and billions at the rate of more than 100,000 clicks a minute going out to news publishers. So there's a lot of traffic being delivered to those sites and ideally monetized.
I'm curious about this, and Eric, I want to get you in here, but Robert and Martin, how do you respond to that? Because I've always sort of felt like that's a pretty reasonable point. Search is a distributor of attention to the content that then, it is true. It's incumbent upon the two of you and your staffs to monetize that attention.
But Google wants to be the home page, it wants to be the front page. Marissa unintentionally encourages promiscuity. It's about digital. The whole Google model is based on digital disloyalty. It's about disloyalty to the creators. Now, obviously, it's up to us to make the article page and the home page as compelling as possible. But if all the people with their computers on now went into Google News and typed in Hamid Karzai, you'll get a series of headlines. And then you'll see there'll be a quote from him. If you click on that quote, you'll go to a whole page of quotes which have been plucked out of stories. And in tiny, tiny font, you'll see where the origins of those stories are. And it might be a New York Times reporter in Kabul or a Wall Street Journal reporter in Kandahar. There is absolutely no intention on that page to drive traffic. I challenge, please.
Do you think there's no intention on that page to drive traffic?
On the quote page.
Our goal is to drive traffic, and we actually do drive a lot of traffic.
But why isn't the font size bigger? For the source.
I never thought I'd have a panel where we disagreed about font size, but I'm feeling... If we could reach detente at 7 points.
No, it has to be at least 9.5. Let's get into double figures.
Well, I want to move to Eric for a second here. And Eric, the Huffington Post, I think, now that we've established the debate, is a hybrid. It, I think, is fair to say, grew based on the backs of lots of other folks, most of them unpaid, who were more than happy to contribute their voices to a phenomenon, a platform of opinion and news, originally around politics and news, but increasingly others. But you do have a curation, approach to the world that, as I understand it, you have 6 or 7 actual editors or reporters on your staff of 60. And that's increasing now, it seems. Do you have a strategy that is going to increase that even more, or are you going to stick with the original strategy of bringing in a lot of guest contributors and not having a newsroom the size of the Journal or the New York Times?
Well, we, like you said, we have about 60 editors, and they're all journalists. So we can debate what is a journalist, what is not a journalist. We are a journalistic organization that employs journalists, and what we do is we tell current event stories, we tell news stories using digital tools, and we also aggregate instant opinion. So it's instant news and instant opinion. This is what our audience likes about the Huffington Post. This is what they seek out. Most of the people who who blog, all of the people who blog for us are unpaid. I'm assuming that's what you're referring to. They're mostly people who are kind of well-known or leaders in their own communities, whatnot. They're not expecting that we would pay them. They're expecting that their views would be heard, and we give them a big platform, a very large audience, and then the audience itself engages almost immediately. I'll give you an example. When the Nobel Peace Prize was awarded to President Obama, it was, as you recall, 6 o'clock in the morning. Somebody knocked on his door. I wondered why the president's not awake by 6.
It's kind of hard to knock on the White House door without an invitation.
I had gone to the gym, and when I came back, we had posted the story, so maybe it was up for about half an hour. We already had 6,000 comments. So it's this instant opinion. That's what people are looking for. The curation, just to end up on your question, the telling of the story using these digital tools can be curation. The stories are alive all the time. They change all the time. We constantly update and change them. Links are a big part of it, and we only link to people who want to be linked to. We assume that if you're going to put your content out on the open web, it's because you want to be linked to. But it's not only links. There's a lot of observations, there's a lot of photos, and increasingly there's participation on the part of the community.
So let me stop you right there, and it's good to have the two of you here, because I think that this is the essential rub, both with Google, which does it automatically through algorithms, and with the Huffington Post, which does it with editors who kind of look at everything that's already out there that is original content. It's been written by the Times or written by the Journal, and then sort of puts a gloss of commentary on it and links back to the original content. But the argument that is made, perhaps by the gentleman on either side of you, is, but we actually go and do the reporting and get the story, and we aren't getting enough credit.
Not by me.
Not by you?
No.
You're cool with all the...
I'm not cool with theft of copyright. I mean, and I think the Huffington Post is guilty of that on way too many occasions.
Yes, we're mixing it up.
But no. But I am cool. I am cool with Google indexing our stuff and Google sending us free traffic, and that's great. But I think all of this is basically a sideshow to the much bigger issue of the business model. And whether or not you're a free site or a paid site, I think that's another sideshow, which is just a distraction. I think the big issue, as I've said to you, John, is what happens in the advertising ecosystem. You're as deep into this as I am. You know what the situation is with respect to brands and brand building activities moving online. Unfortunately, engineering around intent on the CPC side is just very, very difficult. We don't signal a lot of intent on a lot of our journalism. I mean, if you're reading stories about Iraq or Afghanistan or the financial crisis, we don't know what commercial intent is in your mind, and unfortunately, neither does Google for the most part. And so, that model hasn't really translated nearly as well to, horizontal journalism as it has to a business like About.com, which is, just a huge and fantastic business, but it's not the mainstream of horizontal journalism. We're not reporting. We don't have an About team, in Tehran or in Baghdad. So it's that kind of journalism that is at most risk because it's not signaling intent. Yep. And that's the huge problem in the world of journalism today.
Where I come from in Australia, horizontal journalism is after you've had too much to drink and you're completely horizontal.
Most journalists I know are quite good at being horizontal.
Well,
should read Maureen Dowd's column today.
These days it's 2 shots of espresso. But the truth is that there are people who create things, and then there's the reverberation. And both Google and HuffPost are clever, verging on brilliant at what they do, but they are reverberation, they're not creation. And the issue for journalists, and it is existential, and for society is, look, if you undermine the revenue base that has brought all that creation, even the quality of reverberation is going to be diminished.
If I may, I would disagree. I mean, you're going to see a huge amount of original content on the Huffington Post. It might not be the kind of original content that I started my career as a journalist, so believe me, I'm a big defender of journalism, and etc. But the idea that there's a journalist who is kind of the gatekeeper, and who is the only person who, because of their training and their resources, are capable of putting the right story out there is not correct. On the Huffington Post, there's a huge amount of original content. It might not be the kind of original content that you would publish on the Wall Street Journal, but our audience appreciates it.
Well, I wanted to actually ask, if Murdoch's so mad about this, why don't you just put in robots.txt, don't crawl us?
Oh, well, we can do that anytime we like, but obviously the idea that the web has entirely evolved is ridiculous. I mean, you're asking that question as if we've reached the epitome of our life, and we know that that's not true. And I think one of the questions for Google is the very definition of the verb to Google going to change over the next couple of years? Will it mean, in the end, that you're sort of rummaging around remnant content?
Marissa?
Well, our goal, of course, at Google, being a search engine, is to be an accurate reflection of the web and to be comprehensive. So if the answer is out there, or that article exists, or that web page exists, we can find it. But we do have robots.txt, and we respect it. And so if someone doesn't want to be found, or they don't think that their content is being handled as they'd like, they always have that option.
I don't understand how you kind of not love Google. I mean, no, seriously. Look, all the online versions of newspapers, New York Times being #1 up there, have a huge distribution and circulation online, disproportionate to their circulation in print. So they have to love that. How else are they going to get it if it wasn't with Google?
I think the question then comes back to what Martin asked, which is it's wonderful to have a huge circulation online, and it's less wonderful if you can't figure out a way to make enough money to cover your operating costs of having that circulation online and keeping your reporters in Tehran or wherever.
You say that so dismissively.
I'm not saying that dismissively at all. I'm in the business of trying to figure that out.
Of not having correspondence is profound. It's really profound.
The consequences of not having correspondence is profound. I'm not saying it's not. However, I'm not saying it's necessarily the province of the organizations that have been built in the last 100 years. It may be the province of new organizations that have yet to be built. Is that fair?
Well, that's a nice way of putting it, yes.
Well,
it's
I'm just saying that just because...
It's better than being glib about it.
Well, well, you have to give me a chance to unpack the glibness. I mean, after all, we have a whole 20 minutes left.
It's like the whole discussion about investigative journalism. So, we, as others have done, we're taking the point of view that currently there seems to be a movement towards it being more like public service. So we started a fund called the HuffPost Investigative Fund. It's based in Washington. And the bigger of the funds is actually ProPublica, so we're smaller than they are. And we're putting our own money in it, and other nonprofit institutions are coming. I don't know if that's the right model, but at least
it's a model. Yeah. And let's talk about that for a minute. I'm sure that particularly, are you both familiar with Clay Shirky's recent writings and discussions around? I want to give you a quote in which he says that newspapers in the 20th century, and I think he's using newspapers as a proxy for journalism in this case, had a very unusual circumstance in the U.S. in particular, where we had commercial entities producing critical public goods, like as you mentioned, critical public goods. We had ad-supported newspapers producing accountability journalism. It's unusual to have that degree of focus on essentially both missions, making a profit and producing that kind of public value. But that was historic circumstances, and it lasted for decades, but it was an accident. Do you agree with that statement?
Does he mean because they were a monopoly or oligopoly? I mean, if you own the printing press and you own the trucks, then who else could compete with you?
Well, I think there was a capital barrier to entry. There's no question about it. There's a capital barrier to entry in broadcast, a capital barrier to entry in cable. There is less of a capital barrier to entry in the internet, obviously. But there is still this cost of having high-quality journalism, sometimes journalists doing dangerous jobs. Do you think it was an accident that you had for-profit newspapers doing what essentially are extraordinarily important social, beneficial, creating benefit to society? Should that be, as in other countries it is, the province of a tax system that underwrites the fourth estate?
I mean, calling it an accident is probably the wrong word for it, and I don't think that's right. I think, look, we're living through an era of great change all over the place, and I think there are going to be people who come out of that stronger and people who come out of that, frankly, weaker, and some who don't come out of it at all. One of the most important things about the internet, I think, is, as Jeff Bezos says, it giveth and it taketh. And what it has giveth to us is a huge global platform around which to innovate. And we just have to, it's our responsibility to make that work. It's not an accident. We're working our butts off to make that work. And we're engineering our way out of this. We're, writing and editing our way out of it. And we have a very, very large platform now, John. And, Tim, opened up the Times Open Day, where we've released APIs out there, so we're looking at a business model that goes beyond the walled garden. I think that there's tremendous opportunity in journalism and in news and information creation that we're just beginning to see the tip of the iceberg on. Is everyone going to win at this? No, a very, very small number of people are going to win at this. But I think enough people will win at it, and where there are going to be very, very scalable, large global entities that are going to do tremendous work. And there are going to be small guys too. And I think if you're trying to, as sort of to paraphrase Bill Buckley a little bit, stand astride history and put your hands up and say, stop, I mean, that's not going to happen on the internet. It's going to roll over you. And it just will. So you have to innovate your way through it.
So, John, why don't you mention Craigslist in this context, right? Because Craigslist, if I remember, started in 1995. That completely destroyed the classified business for newspapers. And that was way before Google, way before the Huffington Post. I mean, so the new ways of competition are difficult for, I used to run a traditional media business, as you know, Ziff Davis. And when you're running a business and you're really good at it, and New York Times and Wall Street Journal, they're really good at it, it's the innovator's dilemma. It's very hard to change what you're doing because you're doing such a great job. Craigslist, to me, was single-handedly more of a destroyer of newspapers than anything else.
You know what, Eric? By 1995, most people who had a brain knew that classified advertising was history. I mean, if you didn't know that, you weren't awake. And so whose fault is it that classified advertising disappeared? It's not Craig Newmark's fault. I mean, it just happened. So I think, nobody has the right to exist in business. It's that simple.
And I think that was in 140 characters or less.
This will definitely be going to the tweets.
I want to get everyone's opinion, if I can sort of pull back to perhaps an apolitical question, though I doubt it. What does everyone make of the new devices that are coming out? The devices that are potentially really important distribution
it's great.
for everyone here. And I'll ask that, and then I have a specific question, Marissa, for you. But what do you make of the devices that may become distribution points for all of your work?
We've just been in East Asia looking at the next generation. They're interesting, some more than others, but they're just another platform. I mean, to be honest, for us, the most profitable platform at the moment is print. I mean, we're now, as of last week, the largest paper in the country. We frankly sell twice as many copies of the New York Times. So
to take that.
You take that. So we shouldn't ignore that. And just back to the question of journalists for one second, journalists are culpable in what has taken place. Readers are foreclosing on the ivory towers of institutional journalism, and they're quite right to. So you do have to develop new forms of journalism, and those new forms of journalism will appear on all sorts of devices. And basically, our philosophy is to be platform neutral. We have a mobile device, a mobile reader. We've started getting people to register to pay. They'll start paying from next week. In the last 3 weeks, 100,000 people have signed up.
Martin, what do you think of the...
I was really fascinated by Kevin Johnson's presentation yesterday and how there was this kind of incredible device explosion at the same time as there's this kind of bandwidth, and you saw that chart he showed. And I just think, again, it opens up, the web giveth, the web taketh. It opens up a huge, huge opportunity for us. I think that it will be the next great platform of innovation for us. The idea of, I don't know quite how, John, I don't know how this is going to play out. I mean, you've got, e-readers, which are really dedicated book devices like the Kindle and Barnes & Noble's new device, the Nook that was announced today.
Yes.
And they're very, very, I don't know how many people use Kindles here or Kindle-like devices.
How many people do use Kindles?
It's a big group, right?
It's about 25, 30%.
Yeah. So, it's growing rapidly. Those devices are optimized pretty much for books, in my view. The software development kits.
We read the Times on the Kindle.
Well, the SDKs are not optimal for designing a product like the Times. They're really, it's sort of chapter article. It's sort of a crude tree structure design.
Well, that's because it's a closed platform.
Okay, but I was actually getting there. But
I wanted to ask Marissa.
Good. Ask Marissa.
When are we getting an Android-based open platform e-reader?
I would hope soon. I think that my view on the devices is that they really reinforce the fundamental questions that will drive innovation. When you look at, if you ask the question, what if you invented journalism all over again natively for the internet or for mobile? And I think it would look very different. How does a story look? Is it a living thing? How does it update? How do people get there? The very idea of a print newspaper was deliver the news to the doorstep in the morning so people can't walk out of the door without picking it up and reading it. Where's the digital doorstep? Now everyone works from home and they work from different places, right? How can they be greeted by their phone or their e-reader or their laptop or the web browser, email, right? We're going to need to meet the users where they are and use a lot of the really great tools that the internet can provide in terms of being stateful across devices. Wouldn't it be great if you could read 3 stories on your phone on the way to work, and then when you got to work, your desktop just picked it up? Right? Those are the types of questions that I think can be answered. We could bring in elements of personalization. We could bring in elements of statefulness and really make the news engaging in a whole new way. It's already engaging in its print format, but if you think about how to evolve it for the internet, it could become so much more engaging.
Yeah, it is becoming really engaging.
And if you could get that element of engagement, that level of more page views spent, more time spent, I think the business models will naturally follow.
So what's going to happen with all of this, all of the above, is that more and more people are going to want to consume stories, more and more people are going to want to consume news, and it's going to give an even bigger outlet to journalists. And we're in a golden age of journalism. We're in a golden age of people engaging with current events. We should be celebrating this, not bemoaning the past. And yes, the business model is going to have to change. So what? So that that's life, right? As Martin was saying. And hard decisions are going to have to be made. What do you do with your infrastructure and your printing presses and all of that? But it shouldn't take away from the fact that both the Journal and the New York Times have fantastic online editions. The problems of the legacy business is kind of being borne by them, a little bit. But if they were standalone businesses and they could afford, and by the way, one of the things we haven't talked about is advertising. People will pay higher CPMs for quality. Advertisers will pay higher CPMs for quality content.
Well, let's talk about that for a second. I think Martin makes a point, which is it's all well and good to know that the person who came to the story about 25 people getting blown up in a marketplace, in Pakistan, because of behavioral cookies and so on, that these people may have been on an auto shopping site or maybe looking for a baby stroller. It's another thing for a brand to want to put their baby stroller, push down ad next to the picture of blood spattered stalls in Pakistan. I don't know how you solve that problem. Do you?
That's a hard problem, but I think we're starting to figure it out. We broke 6 big brand campaigns on the Times homepage in September alone. I think there's a great renaissance on the creative side in online advertising. There's more innovation there, and you've seen it. I mean,
I've absolutely seen it.
It's not enough.
But
I don't want to sound Pollyanna. It's not enough.
But I think we're getting back to Robert's point about the hardcore journalism that really is sort of essential to the air that we breathe as democracies. The way that newspapers solved for this problem before is to have lifestyle sections, to have crosswords and horoscopes, to have auto sections, to have sections where advertisers felt comfortable. And those sections have been atomized throughout the web now, so that you've got about.com for service, you've got cars.com for cars, you've got this, that, and the other thing. And it's very hard if your bread and butter is hardcore news to figure out how you're going to make that model pay.
There's the advertising business, which is about $200 billion. It actually used to be 250, so yes. But and that will continue, in my mind. You broke all these campaigns. We're breaking brand new business. You are as well, and et cetera. And you see that the quality of the advertiser is really excellent. Then you've got actually a bigger marketplace. I think it's $350 billion, which is PR, communications, product marketing, all of that. And in my mind, all of that's coming together. And what we're seeing is, and you know this from your own work, John, that big brands understand that they can't anymore shy away from the bad news or shy away from the bad conversations. It used to be that people only wanted to be in a safe environment. That's all going to go away because people understand that the world is changing so rapidly that as we speak, people are making decisions about their relationship with the product, relationship with the brands, and they need to be engaged. And we're going to be developing tools that allow people to engage more directly. Some people might not want to do it, but from the conversations we've had with big brands, that time is about to come.
I think that, John, a lot of the first phase of the web's development has almost been quantitative. People have chased eyeballs. They've, sites like Forbes have had the endless charticles about, the 10 best beaches for businessmen who want to bonk and all of that. And you can drive traffic endlessly, but that's absolutely quantitative. And I think advertisers were one, they were slow to react, and two, they were slightly intimidated because they were smart enough to see what was going on. The next phase will be much more qualitative, and hopefully that will play to the strengths of quality sites and quality journalism, and frankly, in the end, quality creation by citizen journalists as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the real danger at this point is this kind of zero-sum game attitude where, the idea of, so-called second channel or exchange-based or exchange-traded media kind of looking past the brands at the audience, frankly, at the expense of the brands, is the biggest threat. I mean, that is a strategic threat to media in general. And I think it's very, very bad for brands and, bad for differentiation. It's good for direct response. If you basically are measuring your objectives pretty much purely on response, it's okay. But I just think, the purpose of business to some extent is to differentiate, and that's why advertising exists. And I think media brands have done a really good job of helping, companies do that. And I think they can continue to do that on the web. But there's a whole movement out there that basically says,
we don't hold you on that because I do want to dig into that very question, but I also want to let everyone know that we have a few minutes for questions. So please, if you have one, come up to one of the two mics here in the aisleway. Sorry, Marissa, but you're the Google representative, and you have an exchange, which I'm quite familiar with. We use it at Federated Media, and I have noticed that it is starting to work better.
We like to hear that.
Work better equals make more money for the people we work with, and that is seductive because your concern is, Martin, that the exchange looks through the brand to the audience and knows a lot of things about the audience, and publishers put their inventory up on that exchange, and advertisers become extremely high-speed stock traders who are buying that inventory in micro-split-second time frames to match the audience to the brand message, irrespective of the brand or the medium. right, of the media brand, whether it's the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Huffington Post. Is this all your fault, Marissa? I mean, are you once again pissing off the journalists? Like, what's your answer to Martin's concern?
Well, I don't think that it's irrespective of brand. This is really about matching the right ad to the right user on the right site, and all of that happens inside of the exchange. And this is just more of Google really wanting to populate the web with high-quality content, right? We have a great search engine because there's great content out there on the web, and some of our programs like AdSense were designed to try and make it possible to bring offline content online in a way that's profitable, and the exchange is more of building on that core competency of advertising. I think it's also important to note that while we certainly have a core competency in advertising, I think that there will be direct payment models for news in the future. I was really struck by a study I read about 2 weeks ago that shows that the average household in America today spends $300 a year on news. And I believe that's absent periodicals. So there is a willingness to pay for quality journalism. We need to build the right tools online, which will take a lot of experimentation and pragmatism, and then ultimately monetize them, either through advertising or direct payment. And most mature mediums usually evolve to have both.
We have time for questions over here.
Hi, my name is Zach Colias from Triget.
Hi, Zach. I couldn't see you in there.
I actually buy ads from all of you on the exchanges. So I'm sorry the New York Times doesn't like when I buy your ads. But what I'm asking about
didn't
is
say that.
There's currently a discussion in Washington about cookies and behavioral targeting, and especially for horizontal media like on the Times and on the Post, my ability to really unlock the value from your content that doesn't really tell me what the user was really looking for is because of behavioral targeting. And my ability to pay you more money for your content comes from that. But I haven't heard a lot out of the newspaper industry to really help us continue to make more money for you. What do you feel about behavioral targeting and those issues and our ability to use that to target your users?
Well, yeah, I mean, the proposal, and one of the proposals is that if you, as a user, are part of a network, you have to opt in. And if you're on the single site, you have to opt out. And if that proposal actually goes through, it's a misunderstanding, a complete misunderstanding of what the web is all about. And certainly the people who are thinking about those things are not people who use the internet or digital on a current basis, because they will really hurt the ability of the marketers to do a lot of the good things that they do, which is that I much rather see an ad that I'm interested in than an ad I'm not interested in. So I'm always very wary of these kinds of regulations because they're made by people who don't get it.
We have time. I'm sorry to say this, but we're already out of time. I'm going to one more question, and then we're going to have to wrap up.
Thank you. My name is Steve Holland with IMC Squared. There's a growing body of evidence that sustainable companies are based upon really two fundamental factors, one being trust, the other being transactions. And when we look at trust of newspapers, it's rather shocking. We see that recommendations by friends, online news, TV news, product sites, industry websites, Wikipedia, all have a higher level of trust than newspapers. And in terms of transactions, my perspective is, and I think many others, is that newspapers should be appreciative, or if not absolutely in love, with Googles of the world, since you are driving the transactions. So fundamentally the question is, how are you going to improve trust, right? That's key. And shouldn't you be open to more transactions, to more trust coming in? Because as I said, a sustainable business model really is based upon trust and transactions.
I mean, I agree with that. I mean, I don't know the answer to the question of trust. It's a big social issue. I think it's complex. To use your word, I think you'd have to unpack it, and I think we probably need a lot more time than we have to do that. I don't know whether Robert has a view of it as well.
Well, I'm for trust. Definitely for trust. I think it's
I'm running on that platform.
Look, I think it's partly that journalists, who are supposed to understand the societies, were so removed from the reality of those societies that they didn't notice they were changing. And 30,000 words from 30,000 feet is not what people want to read. I think clearly integrity is important in all journalism, but I think what those sorts of surveys, and some of them are spotty in their veracity, really show is a lack of connection to society. And unless journalists have that, on whatever platform they're operating, they're not going to succeed.
So anybody who has a teenager or has had a teenager knows that the moment that you have kids in high school, it's over. They only trust their friends. They don't trust you anymore. The same thing is happening more broadly. We have something called HuffPost Social News, where you can follow the news among your friends. It's extremely popular because that's where people want to be influenced. So that's a natural societal thing. I don't think it's something unusual.
I have to cut it off because we're running late. Oops. But please join me in thanking what was a very, very stimulating panel. Martin, always. Marissa, thank you. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Robert. Wonderful. Thanks very much.